The camera is old, heavy grain, a bank in San Francisco. The image shakes just enough to make your brain doubt what it is seeing. And there she is, a young woman, thin, holding a rifle in her hands, standing by the door as if she knew exactly what to do. She is not crying. She is not asking for help. She is not begging. She was supposed to be the victim. But on that tape, on April 15th, 1974, she looks like something else. She looks like part of the robbery. She looks trained. She looks convinced. How does an heiress who is being held hostage end up armed in a bank robbery? The whole world splits between hostage and terrorist. Because if the camera is right, Patty Hearst betrayed everyone. But if the camera is wrong, then we are looking at the most terrifying human experiment imaginable. How to break someone, rebuild them, and force them to perform before an entire country in real time. While people argued over whether she was guilty or a victim, Patty was still missing, still with them, still living under rules no one could see. This case is not a simple fight between psychology and morality. It is a battle of coercion, media spectacle, and who has the power to decide, officially, when a person stops being a victim and becomes a criminal. February 4th, 1974. Kidnapping in Berkeley. April 3rd. A recording surfaces in which she changes her public identity and adopts a war name. April 15th. She appears armed at Hibernia Bank. May. A televised shootout turns everything into a national horror film. September 18th, 1975. She is finally arrested. And even after that, the social verdict does not end. It stays lit for decades. Patty's kidnapping was not only about money. It became the manufacturing of a story. And the main weapon was not the gun. It was the voices, audio, messages, tapes. The SLA did not just keep her captive. It also wrote a script for her and broadcast it to the country like an episodic series. First, a message to calm the panic. I'm alive. Then a message to break the family. I am separating myself from you. Then the twist that changes the category of the case, the bank. And each tape did the same thing. It did not just report an event. It turned it into a public trial in real time. To understand how we got to the bank, we first have to go back to the world where it happened. United States, the 1970s. The Vietnam War is ending, and the country is tired, divided, nervous. Watergate left behind the feeling that no one can be trusted. And in that atmosphere, the words domestic terrorism begin to sound like a constant threat. If all of this feels exaggerated today, imagine this. A small, marginal, armed group that wants to turn itself into a national phenomenon. You do not need to be big if you can make everyone look at you. And the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, needed exactly that, a megaphone. They already had violence behind them. They had already crossed lines, but they were still that, a group almost no one understood, almost no one knew, almost no one feared. Until they chose the perfect target, not for money, not by chance, for symbolism. Patricia Hearst, young, famous by last name, heir to a media empire. A name that sparks opposite emotions: power, privilege, resentment, morbid fascination. If you kidnap Patty, you are not just kidnapping a person, you are kidnapping a national screen. And on the night of February 4th, 1974, in Berkeley, that is exactly what happened. Within minutes, Patty disappears. At first, they keep her locked inside a closet, not a movie cell with bars, a tiny, dark, suffocating space, a place where time stops existing, where the body learns very quickly that it controls nothing. And while she is in there, outside a theater begins, because the SLA does not ask for a normal ransom. It asks for a ransom that forces society to take part, feed the poor, not as private charity, as a public, massive, chaotic, political operation. A kind of moral spectacle. If you want her back, feed 100,000 people for 12 months. And the plan has a number and a price, around $2 million. But the problem with this kind of demand is that it has no clear ending. It can always escalate. It can always become impossible. And that is exactly what happens. Instead of closing the deal, they raise the cost. They take it to $6 million. You might think, if the family pays, it's over. But no. The family gets trapped in a perverse crossroads. You can spend millions, move trucks, set up lines, open warehouses, and they still do not give her back. The operation becomes People in Need, PIN, a name that sounds noble, but functions as a tool of pressure. And while the family sinks into the chaos of feeding 100,000 people, Patty remains locked away, isolated, hungry, afraid, with only one source of reality: her captors. And then the first tape arrives. The country hears her voice. She's alive. That moment calms some people and sets others on fire. Because it is no longer just a kidnapping. It is a show in chapters. And the public, without meaning to, becomes a captive audience. What happens between that first tape and the next one? What happens in weeks of silence, confinement, propaganda, threats, dependence? Because on April 3rd, 1974, the tape arrives that splits the story in two. In that recording, Patty does not sound like a hostage asking for help. She sounds like someone renouncing her family. She adopts a war name, Tanya. And in that instant, millions of people feel the same thing. That's it. She switched sides. The audio does not film the room. The audio does not show the gun just out of frame. The audio does not show the threat that goes unspoken. The audio only gives you a result, never the process. And if the SLA understood one thing, it was this: the country believes what it hears, because it needs to believe it in order to organize the chaos. April 15th, 1974. Hibernia Bank. Security camera, a counter, a guard, frozen customers. The group comes in, and the camera, by accident or by instinct, turns on. And there appears Patty with a gun. And in a matter of seconds, the kidnapping stops being about rescue. It becomes a manhunt, because the country is not listening to an audio anymore. It is looking at an image. And an image, in the public mind, weighs more than any explanation. Here is the dilemma in its cruelest form. The camera proves that she was there, but the camera cannot prove why she was there. It does not film what they told her beforehand. It does not film what they promised her. It does not film what they did to her to bring her to that point. And even so, the world decides, victim or accomplice, hostage or terrorist, and then a hard truth lands. The bank's take is not some major revolutionary score. It is around $10,000. $10,000. That does not change a system. It does not finance a war. It does not feed 100,000 people. So, why risk everything for only $10,000? The money was not the point. The point was the image of Patty armed, the image that destroys her family, the image that turns the SLA into a worldwide phenomenon. From that moment on, every day that passes without her escaping becomes another question. And the story, instead of closing, levels up. May 16th. Patty takes part in an attack on a store. There is a detail that cuts the air. She fires 27 bullets. 27, not one, not two. 27. And that number, for many people, is the exact moment when the case stops being debatable. This is where public opinion screams, it can't be coercion anymore. And yet, this is where coercion, if it exists, becomes crueler. Because if you are a group like the SLA and you want to secure loyalty, it is not enough for the person to simply appear. It is not enough for them to walk beside you. You need a point of no return, an action that marks them, an action that destroys their easy way back, an action that, if they are rescued tomorrow, will not save them from judgment. And then comes the event that turns everything into live television. May 16th and 17th, 1974, Los Angeles, Compton. The police surround a house. The nation watches. Newscasts, reporters crouching low, sirens, gunfire, screams, the dry blast of collective fear. A brutal shootout erupts. The house burns. 6 members of the SLA die. 6. And for hours, the country does not know whether Patty is inside. It does not know whether she died. It does not know whether she was executed. It does not know whether she burned. It knows nothing. But the terrifying reality is that she and the Harrises watch it all on television. From a motel near Disneyland. A motel, Disneyland, minutes away. The place people go to pretend the world is innocent. And in an ordinary room, a hostage watches on TV as her world goes up in flames and understands that if there was an exit before, now there is only chaos. And that is where another myth is born. She had opportunities to escape. Because after the shootout, the group is disarmed, disorganized, on the run. And yet Patty does not appear. She does not come back. She does not ask for help. She does not walk through the door of a police station. She stays with them. And the more time passes, the easier it becomes for the public to reduce everything to one simple word: betrayal. But real coercion does not work like a movie. It is not just a threat in your head and an open door. Real coercion is dependency, accumulated fear, credible punishment, an identity broken and rebuilt with new rules. When the whole world has already seen you with a gun, your return is not a return. It is a tribunal. Patty becomes a fugitive. 19 months missing. 19 months in which every week the country returns to the same question with a different kind of anger. Why didn't she escape sooner? What was real and what was performance? Which part was survival and which part was belief? September 18th, 1975. Patty is found. She is arrested. And when she is booked, another scene appears that feels written by a cruel screenwriter. Under occupation, she describes herself as an urban guerrilla. There you have it. That is the instant that for many people closes the case. But for the system, the real problem is only beginning. How do you judge something like this? Because in a trial, it is not enough to say, "They made me do it." The defense revolves around a word that sounds clean, technical, almost cold: duress. And the judicial system demands hard requirements: immediate threat, real possibility of escape. How free were you? How credible was the danger? How voluntary was each action? The jury is not deciding only whether Patty robbed a bank. It is deciding how measurable fear is, how visible trauma is, how quantifiable manipulation is. And most importantly, who has the right to be called a victim when their face appears on camera? Holding a gun, because if you accept that coercion can manufacture collaborators, then many other stories in other contexts become more complex, more uncomfortable, harder to judge, and then the most powerful invisible antagonist in the case enters. Public opinion, the press, the last name, privilege as a constant suspicion. There are people who look at Patty and think, if she weren't a Hearst, would they treat her the same? There are people who look at the Hearst empire and think, this is karma. There are people who look at the SLA and think, monsters. And there are people who look at the police and think, the state cannot give in to political kidnappings, or it sets a precedent. In this story, everyone has something at stake. She, her life, her identity, her survival, her future. The family, public shame, media power, real pain. The state, not legitimizing political kidnapping. The SLA becoming a myth. And the public, the desperate need for there to be an easy answer. Guilty or innocent. Betrayal or syndrome. Everything or nothing. But the case resists. Because even within the narrative itself, contradictions appear that feel like knife wounds. On certain tapes, Patty rejects the idea that she was brainwashed, and yet her legal defense rests on coercion and manipulation. And if that feels incoherent to you, think about it from the most human angle possible. When your survival depends on your captors, sometimes you say what it serves you to say in that moment. Sometimes you deny. Sometimes you exaggerate. Sometimes you do the only thing that keeps you alive. And then comes the judicial ending, but not the social ending. The conviction exists. The appeal comes to challenge the standard for duress. The system tries to be logical about a phenomenon that is emotional, invisible, and deeply human. And even so, years later, something happens that for many confirms bias, and for others, confirms compassion. January 29th, 1979. President Jimmy Carter commutes her sentence, and shortly afterward, on February 1st, 1979, Patty walks out of prison. But that does not close the story. It only changes the stage, because then the debate mutates. It is not just whether she was guilty, it is whether she received clemency because of trauma, or because of her last name. January 20th, 2001. The final pardon arrives, a legal erasure. But the human brain does not work like an official document. You can erase a record, but you cannot erase the bank tape. You cannot erase the gun. You cannot erase the closet. You cannot erase the 27 shots. You cannot erase the televised fire. At what point does surviving become collaborating? And who gets to decide that line? You, from your seat, with all the information and zero risk, or her, with 19 months of threat, isolation, propaganda, fear, and a nation watching every word as if it were a confession, or a jury, forced to measure terror with rigid rules, or the camera, which captures 1 second and condemns an entire life. We will never be able to see what the camera did not film. We will never be able to reproduce exactly how an identity is broken inside a closed room. Or, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, support the channel by subscribing. That way, we can keep bringing you new mysteries. And tell me, is there a specific story you'd like us to tell for you? Sending you a hug.